Welcome back to The Explainer. I am so excited to get into today's story because we're looking at something that just completely flips the classic American crime narrative right on its head. When we think of the 1930s, we usually picture these slick, meticulously organized, glamorous outlaws, right? Well, today, we are diving into the frankly bizarre 1937 to 1938 crime spree of a guy named John Henry Seedland. And let me tell you, tracing his path across the mid-country is like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You're going to see a trail of chaos that is, well, it's anything but glamorous. So, the big question we're tackling today: what actually happens when a supposedly ruthless 1930s outlaw is just constantly derailed by sheer absurdity? We've all bought into this cultural myth of the criminal mastermind, right? But Seatland's reality? Completely different. As you'll see, his time on the run is basically defined by a string of absolute blunders, terrible luck, and comedic missteps. At least until things take a super dark turn. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the bank robber's return. So it's January 1937, and Seedland decides, hey, it's time to head back to his old stomping grounds and get back into the bank robbing business. He sets his sights on the First National Bank at Shakopee, Minnesota, and surprisingly, he pulls it off. He walks away with exactly $4,700. Now, in January of 1937, that was a huge haul. So right out of the gate, boom, he gets exactly what he wants. But what does he do next? He immediately scurries all the way back west to Spokane, Washington with the cash. He pulls off the job and just runs hiding right back to his safe zone. And keep this initial success in the back of your mind, because honestly, it's basically the very last time things actually go according to plan for him. Literally right after this, the whole operation just falls completely off the rails. Which perfectly cues up our next chapter, Section 2, an unexpected crime partner. Fast forward just a few months to June 1937. Seedland is feeling bold again, so he starts making his way back east for his next big score. And on his way toward Wisconsin, he picks up a 20-year-old hitchhiker near Superior, Montana, a guy named James Atwood Gray. So Gray asks if he can just sleep in the back seat. Sure, no problem. But while he's back there, Gray actually finds a gun just wedged in the upholstery. So what does he do? He decides to hold up his own driver. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. He takes Seedland's money, and he's just about to steal the car when Seedland manages to catch him off guard and knocks the kid out cold. Just picture that for a second. A supposed bank robber getting carjacked by a sleeping hitchhiker in his own getaway car. But instead of just dumping Gray on the side of the road, Seedland does something completely unexpected. He forces the kid to drive, and after a few days of this super weird dynamic, they actually decide, hey, let's team up. And that wild, bizarre little partnership brings us right to Section 3, the candy box heist, probably one of the most ridiculous moments in true crime history. Okay, so the newly formed dynamic duo finds themselves in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Supposedly, they're there to plot a major bank robbery, but they get totally sidetracked by a local rumor about a truck hauling this super valuable hot jewelry. Now watch how this completely exposes their lack of skill. Step 1, they ditch the bank plan, hold up a truck full of women, and snatch what they think is this prized box of hot jewelry. Step 2, to make sure they can get away, they actually take one of the women hostage and bolt. They drive, maybe 4 or 5 miles down the road before finally letting her go. And then, step 3, the grand finale. They find a safe spot, they pry open this highly guarded, hostage-worthy box of stolen loot, and discover it's full of candy. Yep, not jewels, candy. They literally took a human being hostage over a box of sweets. It just perfectly captures how bumbling this whole spree had become. But they don't stop there. We are now entering Section 4, botched plots and baseball stars. The chaos pivots away from banks to a string of completely fumbled extortion and kidnapping attempts. Let's look at the September 2nd plot in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. They hear this cafe owner has $100,000 worth of hot jewelry stashed away. So they tail the guy and his wife, hold them up, and kidnap the wife. They hold her for 2 whole days, but completely fail to get any ransom money from the husband. So what do? They just let her go on September 4th. And the craziest part about this kidnapping was an interstate crime, which meant the FBI actually had absolutely no jurisdiction over it at the time, but they still walked away with nothing. Or, how about the Decatur, Illinois plot? Gray is waiting in the getaway car while Seedland sneaks up to the house of a wealthy merchant, only to find out the guy isn't even in the city. He was literally out of town, so they just throw their hands up and walk away. Just completely botched jobs, one right after the other. And as if his delusions of grandeur couldn't get any wilder, Seidland later actually admitted directly to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, no less, that he seriously considered kidnapping the famous baseball star Jerome Dizzy Dean.
I know, right? But why didn't he?
Well, he told Hoover he suddenly realized the complex ramifications of trying to force an entire professional baseball club to pay a ransom. I mean, the guy literally thought he was operating on a level where he could take on a major sports franchise, completely brushing past the fact that just weeks earlier, he had accidentally held up a truck for a box of candy. Okay, I need to shift gears right here. Because while the incompetence we've been talking about borders on pure comedy, it doesn't last. The bumbling abruptly drops off into dark tragedy in our final chapter. Section 5, a fatal final act. Just look at this timeline. The dizzying, chaotic pace of 1937 was just spiraling totally out of control. It starts in January with that Shakopee Bank robbery. By June, he meets Gray, and we get that bizarre carjacking. September 2nd, the fumbled Lake Geneva kidnapping. And then, less than 4 weeks later, on September 26th, we hit his final kidnapping. It's wild to see how fast the sheer chaos of his life on the road escalated straight toward a fatal climax. And the grim reality of that final act was absolutely brutal. On that late September day, they kidnapped a man named Charles Sherman Ross. Only this time, there was no accidental release. No botched walk-away ransom. It ended with the murder of Charles Sherman Ross. And if that wasn't horrific enough, the paranoia and the sheer stress of the chaos finally imploded their own partnership. Seidland ultimately turned on his hitchhiker-turned-partner and murdered James Atwood Gray, too. The bumbling thief had fully morphed into a double murderer. But the law finally caught up with John Henry Seidland. July 14, 1938. That was the absolute end of the line. For these offenses, Seidland was executed by electrocution in Chicago, Illinois. So, just a little over a year after picking up a hitchhiker in Montana, the whole shebang was over. The story comes to a very quiet, solemn close just 3 days after his execution. On July 17, 1938, John Henry Seidland was laid to rest. He was buried about 2 miles south of Ironton, Minnesota, in the Klondike Cemetery, placed right beside his father. It's a remarkably quiet, unglamorous end for a man who chased infamy all across the mid-country. Which brings us to the final question I want to leave you with today. Does the chaotic, bumbling reality of Seidland's spree forever shatter the myth of the glamorous 1930s outlaw? You know, when you really look past the flashy headlines and study the actual facts, the stolen candy, the kidnapped victims released for zero payoff, the empty houses, and those tragic, pointless murders at the end, you realize the truth behind these true crime legends is so often incredibly messy, deeply disorganized, and profoundly unglamorous. Thank you so much for joining me today to unpack this wild piece of history. Stay curious, keep analyzing the facts, and I'll see you in the next explainer.